We had a beautiful wedding here this afternoon for Kevin's, Matt Scullin and Allison Hinkle. It's probably the biggest wedding I've ever had. The church was packed. It looked like Easter Sunday in here. It was so packed, but it was also so very hot. I was sweating so bad that I actually start getting dizzy. And by the time it was over and I got home, I was sick. The heat's never got to me like that before. But we have to air condition this church. So I'm not going to talk too long tonight because I need to go home and sit down again. Jesus is often attacking the Pharisees and the scribes because he knows what's deep inside their hearts, and he calls them to task for it. And that's what he's doing today. The issue of his disciples not washing their hands before they eat. Now, my mother would have trouble with that. You know, I mean, even if our friends came over to dinner and eat at our house, Mom would say, you too go and wash your hands. They all have to. It was the way we did it. But the issue isn't about germs. It isn't about cleanliness. It's about purity. It's about purifying. He's again looking at they're washing their hands, but inside their hearts are full of anger and adultery and unchastity and all these things that he lists. And that's what needs to change. It was just a practice that Moses did, and then they put it in the law of Moses. There never really was a law. It was a tradition. It was a tradition. We had traditions in the church. Remember when most of us here in this church were in grade school, all the women wore hats to church, and sometimes just a veil, but they all would not come into church without something on their head because it was a sign of respect. And remember all the little clips that used to be in the pews? That was so men could hang up their hat. Because if a man left his hat on during church, he was being very disrespectful. And even St. Paul commented how women should cover their heads when they come to the temple. But again, what was it for? It was to be a sign of respect. It was to remind people that they're in the presence of the Blessed Sacrament. In the Code of Canon Law in 1917, it was written in there that women should wear hats and men should not in church. 1983, it started to fall by the way, and it wasn't even mentioned in the Code of 1983. So it just stopped. But it was a tradition. It had its value at the time. And so what the scripture is saying to us today is that if we have certain traditions that we do just because we always did them, we should stop and ask, why do I do that? Like for myself, for example, I don't eat meat on Friday. They changed the law. But I decided that I want to keep doing that because it's good for me. It makes me every Friday stop and think that if I deprive myself of meat, what's the reason? I need to not be too attached to any material thing so that I can be closer to Christ. That's the purpose. And so those are the things that we need to look at when we question why do we do what we do. And so there's many traditions that we have, but they all come down to, as we read in the second reading, I believe, that we're supposed to love God above all things and our neighbor as ourselves. I think the reading said that in St. James that we should take care of the poor and that we should be like Christ. If something makes us a little bit more like Christ or draws us closer to Christ, then it's a good thing for us to do. But it makes no sense at all if I come here with my head bowed and look all holy, but then go out there and gossip and do all kinds of things that are not holy. That's this very simple message, I think, from the gospel today. Just like at the through the Mass, we're conscious of asking God to forgive us, aren't we? And the priest is even privately. When I bow before the gospel, I say the prayer, may the Lord cleanse my heart and my lips that I may worthily proclaim his holy gospel. And then at the offertory time, the altar servers will bring me a bowl and water to wash my hands. And the prayer there is, Lord, wash away my iniquities and cleanse me of my sin. It's to remind me I'm about to do something very sacred at the altar, and I can never stop asking God to make me worthy to do that. And it's like the altar boy who was the only altar server they had for weekday masses, a young boy, and the family was going on vacation. And he told his mother and father he was worried about and concerned about leaving the church. And he said, well, why? Because he said, if I go on vacation, who's going to wash away father's iniquities? So, at any rate, we all have iniquities and we need to ask God's forgiveness. So look at the things you do always and say, even traditionally, and even some things you still do. Why do we do them? Hopefully it's to draw us closer to Christ.